Captain Sarah Chen had been missing for 3 days. The military base was silent except for the sound of boots on cold concrete and the low hum of radios. Her squad sat in the briefing room staring at her photograph on the wall, smiling, confident, alive. But somewhere out there in enemy territory, Sarah was alone, wounded, and nobody believed she was still breathing. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Sarah's helicopter had crashed during a supply run near the border. The explosion had thrown her clear of the wreckage, but not before burning the left side of her uniform and leaving a deep cut across her ribs. She had crawled into a ravine as enemy trucks approached, watching through pain-filled eyes as soldiers searched the smoking ruins. When they found no survivor, they marked the crash site and moved on. But Sarah was still there, hidden beneath rocks and broken branches, bleeding into the dust. For the first day, she didn't move. Fear kept her frozen more than her injuries did. The desert around her was empty and hostile, stretching for miles in every direction. Every sound made her heart race. A bird, the wind, the distant rumble of engines. She thought about her twin brother Marcus, who had tried to convince her not to join the military. "You're too good for this," he had said before her deployment. Now, bleeding alone in enemy territory, she wondered if he had been right. By the second night, Sarah knew she had to make a choice. She could stay hidden and hope for a rescue that might never come, or she could move. Her ribs screamed with pain when she stood, but she forced herself forward, using a broken branch as a walking stick. The cut above her ribs had stopped bleeding, but the exhaustion was crushing. She hadn't eaten, she hadn't drunk water. Her mind felt like it was floating above her body. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, the sound of her own voice strange in the silence. Marcus didn't raise a quitter. It was a small lie. They had raised each other after their parents died, but it pushed her forward. On the morning of the third day, Sarah saw the convoy. 3 military trucks were moving through a narrow mountain pass just like the ones she had seen from the ravine. Enemy soldiers. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, but something inside her had changed during those 3 lonely days. She wasn't running anymore. Not from them, not from anything. Sarah moved carefully along the cliffs above the pass, using rocks and shadows to stay invisible. Her training came back to her like muscle memory. Stay low, stay quiet, stay smart. The convoy stopped in a flat section and the soldiers jumped out to stretch and check their supplies. This was the moment. This was her only chance. She had found a signal flare in her emergency pack, buried at the bottom under a torn map. Using it as a weapon instead of a rescue tool, she triggered it and threw it down the mountainside. The red explosion of light filled the sky, and the soldiers below froze in confusion. In those few seconds of chaos, Sarah moved. She scrambled down the rocky slope and dropped directly behind the lead truck, landing hard on the truck bed. "Contact!" she yelled into her damaged radio, hoping someone was listening. "This is Captain Chen. I'm alive and taking the convoy. Stand by." The soldiers below had no idea what was happening. They spun around looking for an attack from above, from the sides, from anywhere. But Sarah was already moving through the truck, securing weapons and supplies with the precision of someone who had trained for exactly this situation. Her mind was crystal clear now, sharper than it had been in years. The pain in her ribs meant nothing. "Get us out of here!" she shouted from the truck's cabin, facing the terrified driver. "Move now or I'll do it myself." The driver's hands shook as he started the engine and hit the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, kicking up clouds of dust. Behind them, the other soldiers were still trying to understand what had happened. They fired at the truck, but the range was wrong, and their bullets hit only air and metal. Sarah gripped the roof with one hand, a rifle in the other, watching as they fell behind. She had done it. She had survived. She had fought back. 40 minutes later, the truck crested a hill and Sarah saw something that made her want to cry. A blue flag. Her country's flag. A military checkpoint appeared through the haze of dust and heat, and soldiers began running toward her truck with their weapons ready, until they saw her face in the window. "Captain Chen?" a young lieutenant called out, his voice full of disbelief. "That's right. Sarah said, her voice steady as she climbed down from the truck. "And I brought intelligence about enemy movements in that pass. We need to move fast before they regroup." The soldiers stared at her like she was a ghost. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood and dirt. Her face was pale from the pain, but her eyes were fierce and alive. She had been left for dead, abandoned by the enemy who thought no one could survive the crash. But they had made a terrible mistake. They had left behind a warrior. Later, as medics tended to her wounds in the base hospital, Marcus arrived. He ran into the room and grabbed his sister's hand, tears streaming down his face. "You made it," he whispered. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I promised you I would," she said. "And I always keep my promises." The enemy had tried to destroy Captain Sarah Chen, but they had underestimated the power of courage, the strength of a soldier who refused to give up, and the unbreakable will of someone fighting to come home. In the end, the only thing that could stop her was herself, and that was never going to happen.